much. Hi, everyone. Just real quick, on behalf of USC, firstly, we want to thank Nina and the London College of Fashion for having us, allowing us to have an amazing platform for what we hope will be a really inspiring event. For those who don't know, come in, please, don't worry. For those who don't know, we are a London-based alumni club, which is kind of functioning as the community for USC alumni and any students and friends of the school who are in the UK. So I will be next door as well at the end of the event. Would love to meet everybody, let you know about the club and any programming we have. But the most important programming is the one we're about to do right now. So I will pass it back to Nina.
Thank you, Denise. And before we start speaking to the panelists, you'll see on the screen a QR code to the Slido. And if you go and scan it, or if you just go to slido.com on your phones and put in the event code 114113, you can ask questions, and I will be able to see those, and it'll be very interactive. A plan B, of course, is if you want to raise your hand at the end of the discussion, and I will walk around with the microphones, as again, it's about you guys and making the most of the opportunity speaking to our panelists. And we have three incredible panelists today. First of all, we have Nina, oh goodness gracious, from Cult Mia, which is a sustainable platform in the fashion space. And then we have Danny from This Outfit Does Not Exist, looking at digital garments, a digital garment marketplace. And then we have Negin, who is in Dubai, who is looking at this from an ethical side, looking at fashion law, and really kind of merging these different changes between tech, sustainability, and what this means for the industry. So without further ado, hopefully the teams will work and we can actually stream in the panelists. Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. This is amazing. Magic. Hello, Danny. Hello, Negin. Perfect. Los Angeles and Dubai represented. Excellent. So let's get started. And Nina, my fellow Nina on stage, we'll begin with you. And you are the founder and CEO of Cult Mia. Could you give us a little bit of an introduction as to what is Cult Mia and how are you approaching sustainability?
Absolutely. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me and my mic is working okay. Great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. As Nina mentioned, I'm the founder of Cult Mia. We're a global marketplace that curates independent and emerging designers from around the world. And since we started our journey 2 years ago, sustainability has really been at the front of our agenda. And it really has focused on evaluating and identifying the leading sustainable brands from around the world. So since we launched, we've onboarded over 200 designers from 45 or so different countries. And we have recently shifted to thinking about how we can ensure our values, our mission is clearly communicated and the leading factor in our business model. Mm-hmm. So when we think about sustainable fashion and what it means, to me, it's definitely a multifaceted topic that I'm still learning about every day. But, a lot of people will tell you sustainability and fashion, it's an oxymoron. And I really disagree with that because everywhere you look, we're shining a spotlight on sustainability. It's the leading topic in every fashion agenda. And it's what I hear from the brands we speak to every day. And if we think about Cult Mia and our brand offering, for example, 40% of our brands are made to order. So they've decided to take a slow fashion approach to their way of working. And for us, it's been really interesting to kind of learn and grow and think about these different interesting, innovative, and sustainable models that have fueled our platform's growth. And I think, it's really important to decouple fashion from the industry and from consumption. And we as a platform have taken a stance in supporting, deeper sustainability via our brands in two important ways since we started. The first is the selection of our brands, and we can dig into that if you guys are interested later, but it's the core selection criteria for us. But the second is a little bit different to a lot of new platforms, and I think e-commerce businesses in general, is if we've decided to take a stance against holding any brand-damaging markdowns. And we've really focused on, thinking about what you're consuming and avoiding mindless consumption. And feel free to kind of dig into anything you've picked up on, Nina, but I think to summarize, what sustainability and fashion means to us, I recently started reading a book yesterday by the ex-founder, the ex-CEO of Unilever, Paul Polman. It's called Net Positive. Mm-hmm. And as I started reading this book yesterday, I thought, okay, this is perfect for tomorrow's chat. But basically, the key message is, and what we've stuck to from the beginning of our trajectory, is businesses should think sustainably because it's good for business and it's good for the planet. And that's what we've seen to date. And I think that's kind of our guiding principle looking ahead.
I just want to rewind a little bit with what you said about your selection criteria. And I think, all of us see a lot of greenwashing happening. People put the buzzword sustainable this, eco that. But how are you actually, holding your brands accountable and making sure that, those that you do select, are practicing what they're preaching?
It's a good question. To kind of improve our process that I'll explain in a second, we actually just started a partnership with Positive Luxury. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization, but we're not claiming to be experts in everything sustainability, but we've decided to partner with different organizations that can help us find those frameworks and kind of improve our selection criteria. But if we zoom out and we think about how we select our brands, we first think about operational excellence and we look at, what does our community want in terms of product, price, quality, exclusivity, and so on. But equally, and actually more importantly, are the values that underpin each brand. And we work with a network of brand sourcing partners across the globe, the equivalents of the British Fashion Council in different countries, because our small team can't fly to Bali and to Colombia and to Beirut to select new brands, but we have the Australian Fashion Council or Pro Colombia helping us vetting brands on the ground. And this has allowed us to scale quite quickly, but more importantly, only onboard brands whose quality and processes, especially from the sustainability perspective, we can really trust. So we're essentially onboarding organizations that help us through this filtering process. That has been really interesting. But if we boil down a little bit more on the values that we care about, so sustainability, we're here to talk about that. It's really important to us, but it is a widely defined term. A lot of brands, say they're doing things sustainably, but I'd also like to mention that we also equally care about social consciousness, female empowerment, and protecting local craft and heritage. So those are the 4 values that, as a platform, we represent, and all of the brands we onboard tick at least one of these boxes. My favorite brands are the ones that tick all 4. To give you an example, one of our top brands is a Lebanese designer called Sarah's Bag. They're a fully social enterprise, so they're a charity brand. Sarah employs women who come out of prisons in Beirut and gives them a job. Everything is handmade, locally produced, and it's made to order. So there's zero waste. This is an example of the type of brand that we try and identify and work with and bring onto the platform.
And you've mentioned you're working a lot with made to order. That's quite core to what you're doing. Are there other kind of sustainable business models, I guess, that you're seeing pick up quite a bit of traction, or what you think is actually really working?
Definitely. We talk a lot about made to order because we've seen a amazing platform that's going to pick you up, how customers are going to respond. A lot of times your product is a platform in terms of what gets picked up and what doesn't. From a customer standpoint, I worked at Moda Operandi before starting Coltmia. For those of you guys who haven't heard of Moda, Moda was the Farfetch or the Net-a-Porter in the U.S. Is still around, very much still around. And at Moda, a big focus was pre-order. And that was also interesting from a sustainability perspective because, again, you were looking for insights, you were looking for trends before brands, big luxury brands, went out there and produced their full luxury assortment or collection of that season. customers didn't want to wait 3 to 6 months. That's a very long time to wait for your order. But made to order on Cult Mia, I was looking at our 2021 stats. I can tell you that 96% of our orders are dispatched within 2 weeks. So there's no waste, but it arrives quickly. And you're kind of meeting at this halfway point where, you aren't being wasteful, and we know that the biggest issue in fashion is overproduction. That's what we always hear. So this is why we like made to order. Arrives quickly, made for you, not wasteful, but we equally are interested in made to measure. And this is something we're rolling out this year, and it kind of happened organically. So customers would say, okay, this is made to order, can you adapt it to my measurements? And our brand started saying yes, yes, yes. And what we realized is if something's made to measure, obviously, and it's made bespoke for you, you can't return it.
Yeah.
And another huge problem in fashion is returns from a sustainability perspective, right? So we saw our return rate as a platform go as low as 4% via made to order and made to measure. The average, and a conservative average, I think you can say, is 25%. Some luxury platforms see up to 50%. So, we're trying to think of a way that keeps customers happy in terms of, Amazon, everything arrives same day, but is conscious to the needs of emerging designers in terms of, the materials they have available, their production capacity, wanting to be more mindful, less wasteful. Combining all of these elements, we have decided as a platform to really focus on made to order and made to measure as we grow.
And one of the questions from the audience is, what are some of the challenges that you're actually facing with made to order? Because, it's a bit more of a complex process, I would imagine, a bit more, timely, as you were saying.
So it's important just to distinguish. Made to measure is bespoke. It's almost like the rebirth of couture or Savile Row. Made to order is not, right? It's not, it is more timely because you're not mass producing. But from our brand's perspective, it's actually super efficient, and they can sometimes work in batches. So what they'll try and do is they'll group orders that come in, say, over 3 days and work on a 3-day bulk production process. Some of the challenges, to be honest, when we were looking at our brand's performance last year, 8 out of our top 10 brands were made to order. So we haven't necessarily experienced that type of challenge. The one challenge I'd identify is the brands that really start to pick up with us or specific hero products, we ran out of materials, right? Because brands didn't pre-produce 1,000 units. They ran out of materials and they had to kind of resource, restock, and so on. So that would be a growing pain, I would say, but not necessarily a challenge that isn't solvable.
And in terms, this sounds amazing, and I look forward to kind of see how Cult Mia, grows and expands. But in terms of consumer behavior and shopping, are you seeing more truly sustainable shopping behavior? Are people actually looking for green purchases? I think I saw a statistic from Mintel saying I think 56% of UK adults are looking for brands that align with their values. So are you seeing that from your end with the company?
Overall, yes. So, for example, if we put out content where we're telling the story of a brand and we're really explaining how they're sustainable and we're showing you the behind the scenes of the production and the materials, engagement goes up and sales go up. So yes. However, no one is willing to trade off style and price for sustainability yet from what we've seen.
Yeah.
And what we've focused on as a platform is finding pieces and brands where you don't have to have that trade-off. Because there is almost this kind of conception of shopping sustainably means, kind of like the hemp, neutrals, like nothing distinctive, nothing particularly exciting. And obviously that has changed a lot recently. But, just to say, customers won't buy it just because it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And customers won't pay more for it because it's sustainable, right? So we're trying to find that exciting offering, and the good thing is there's lots of amazing brands that are sustainable, well-priced, and cool.
Absolutely. On that note, this is the first time I've ever rented a garment, and it was very much because it's sustainable, but also because I just loved the dress. And I think, it's the same with your company. If it's a great piece, if it's something that speaks to you and also your values, a definite win-win. And on the topic of sustainability, another big buzzword is obviously the metaverse and NFTs and digital fashion. And I'm going to go to you, Danny. Hopefully you can hear us okay. I can see you from my screen down here. And very much in all of the headlines, lots of buzz. And just in terms of an introduction, I'd love to know what brought you into this space, first of all, and how are individuals and maybe larger brands getting into digital clothing today?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So there's a tiny echo on my end.
How about now?
I'll just carry on. That's perfect, actually. So I got into the space originally, I grew up absolutely loving fashion, but in a similar way to I think everybody in this panel had seen a transition from it being this very movement-driven, process where, you had these young designers coming into the industry and what you wore really represented who you were, to this kind of way of feeding mass market consumerism. And so pivoted, went into the social impact space, and then was actually working in emerging tech. Whilst my entire social life and, all my passions were fashion driven, I didn't necessarily see an intersection between that and my career at its earliest stages. And so I was working at a company where essentially we would go into large corporates and we'd say, here's how emerging technology is going to disrupt your industry. Here's how you should respond. And I came back into looking at the way that, fashion technology had been incorporated, and read an article around a year and a half ago where the chief monetary officer of Gucci said, we're going to start creating clothes to be produced digitally in the next 2 years. And something just clicked in my head, and looked out into the space and looked, first of all, at the influencer economy where, there was a crazy statistic about what a high proportion of people in the UK buy clothes for photos. And, the average consumer in the UK allegedly wears an item in their wardrobe 7 times before discarding it, and saw digital fashion to have this incredible, enticing proposition for the sustainability space, and realized that nobody was writing about it, and also nobody was showcasing the clothes. So just started off as a side hustle to ostensibly bring digital fashion to life. And so educate the consumer, educate brands around the colossal opportunity. And it's a very, very funny thing, because when I started, first of all, people thought I was crazy, and I expected it to be 3 or 4 years before it really took off. And obviously what we saw, 2 or 3 months after I started, there was the NFT boom. There was also this transition towards metaverse, and metaverse being this incredible buzzword. And COVID, et cetera, obviously accelerated the intersection and parity between our digital and physical lives, which has driven the shift. And so to go a little bit into what digital fashion actually is in my eyes, is it just largely surmounts to being any worn item created in the digital realm. And so that falls into 3 categories. You have IRL, or in real life digital fashion, which I recognize is slightly oxymoronic, but basically refers to physical clothes created with a digital backend. Then the second type is ORL, so on real life. And so that is digital fashion worn on a human being. So it can be through an AR filter, or it can be through a digital render, which have become these prevalent means of leveraging digital fashion. And Farfetch, for example, recently did a campaign where all of the models were dressed in digital fashion, and it was preempting their shift towards having a made-to-order segment. And then what we have is this final category, which I think is going to proliferate increasingly in the coming years, and it's fully URL or unreal life digital fashion, and that's consumed direct to avatar. And so up until this point, direct to avatar has largely been something used in games, and we have 3.4 billion gamers at the moment, which is an absolutely colossal number. But obviously what we've seen with Facebook becoming Meta, and we're also seeing a number of games incorporate what's known as creator modes, where you're not engaging with challenge-driven actions, you're instead just using it as a baseline for social interaction. I think we're going to see a real proliferation of this direct avatar digital fashion in the coming years.
Could you go a little bit more, give more detail about this avatar fashion? Because there are these buzzwords, there are some really cool kids, using digital clothes. And, will this actually hit the mass market? Will this become normalized in the next few years?
So this is what's so fascinating. I don't consider myself a gamer. I would assume, a lot of people in this room do not consider themselves gamers. And so then it's a very easy, okay, direct to avatar, how does it relate to me? And it's much easier to say, okay, I'd wear digital fashion on my social media because Instagram is a platform that I regularly engage with and I use as a means to show off the clothes that I wear. But yet, one of the most significant moves that we've seen in the past year was Facebook rebranding to Meta. And what came with Facebook rebranding to Meta is they are building out avatar-based social networks. And so I think an interesting way to think about it is the way that we use social media currently is you have a curated persona, so a curated version of yourself. So you choose select snippets from your life, you publicize them. And instead, what we're going to be engaging with when we engage with avatar-based social media, so, imagine instead of us engaging on a panel right now with two people on Zoom, we all interact as an avatar version of ourselves, or the way that we communicate in chat functionalities also has an attached body or upper half or head, etc., is that we're going to see digital fashion have to become mass market as social media moves towards this avatar model. And so in the same way that fashion is this incredibly powerful social signaler in the physical world, you're going to want to dress your avatar because that is a signaler of who you are. And what's very exciting about this move to avatar, in my opinion, is obviously when we engage in fashion in the physical world, our choices are not only sculpted by budget, but also actually these biological characteristics that we're tethered to, so our physical appearance. When you then move to this direct avatar economy, instead of having a curated version of yourself biologically tethered, you can create yourself from nothing. So however you want to look, maybe it's a specific identity that matches your outfit, but that will lead to an entirely new populace engaging with fashion who would have maybe not felt comfortable doing so in the physical world. And I think it also will lead to extreme innovation on the creator side, which is something we can also go into a little bit.
Fantastic. And actually on that note, Nina, do you think that, all of the developments that Danny was saying in the digital world, is that competition to what you're doing with sustainability, or do you see this actually as an opportunity for consumers to become more sustainable? And Danny, feel free to weigh in here as well.
Yeah, I think you'll still need to wear clothes yourself, even if you're dressing your virtual persona. But, from our side, we've had a bit of exposure to avatars from a virtual sizing room perspective. That's been really interesting. And you're trying to kind of better gauge your size. And we actually did a test, and we had an avatar, follow the model dimensions, and you'd preview the outfit you were looking at on the model in your virtual fitting room. And then we did a test where we were showing, the avatar who looks just like you. And this, I think, builds on Danny's point, because the avatar that looks just like you, conversion rates went down, which is super interesting and sad, to be honest, because people, liked seeing clothing more on not themselves for most points. But I think, both of these worlds will continue to develop, at least in the short run, quite independently. And I think, at least our type of sustainable fashion is looking into how to integrate avatars to kind of mitigate returns from that perspective, and to kind of help you make more informed sizing decisions and reduce those transportation costs. But I think, hopefully you'll still be dressing up and thinking about your amazing statement dress in person, as well as online if you'd like to.
And Danny, from your perspective, what is that sustainable angle with your business?
So I think to add to that, I completely agree that digital fashion will not in any way replace its physical counterparts. For me, what I see it as is this very exciting complement to slow fashion in the made-to-order model. And there are a couple of ways that I see this. First of all, obviously, the fashion industry has traditionally relied on saying, you want to evolve your identity, be it every season, be it in fast fashion, every couple of days, engage with us. And it's very hard to say to not want to engage with that model due to the fact that it's been, the prominent way of the fashion industry engaging for a very long time. And what digital fashion offers, be it through your avatar or be it through, trying clothes on virtually on yourself, it offers the ability to experiment with identity without having to make purchases, which then, you'll wear a couple of times and throw away. So that's a very basic one. I also see it as this very compelling complement to the made-to-order model. What, as we all know, one of the biggest issues in the fashion industry is you're dealing with an industry that's incredibly gated. So in terms of the cost to start up as a new designer. Secondly, due to how hard it is to be demand responsive if you're not operating on a made-to-order model. And thirdly, this issue around exposition. So if you don't live in one of the fashion capitals or you don't have the right connections, it's very, very hard to break out as a brand. And what originally drew me to digital fashion was the fact that as a creator, you can create a design digitally. You can use algorithmically generated assistants to get it on models online, be it an avatar or be it, a physical model. And then you can become demand responsive and transition towards made to order and reduce those costs, heighten the exposure, and actually start living as a physical brand, which I think is very, very exciting. So both on the consumer and the creator side, I see it as this, hopefully this leveler and this ability to inform far more conscious consumption decisions in the physical world.
I love how you were touching upon, essentially the democratization of fashion, because as you said, you don't have to live in London, you don't have to be in a fashion capital, you don't necessarily have to have gone to a fashion university. And so I guess, are you saying that digital actually provides new opportunities, potentially new job roles? Could you speak a little bit more about, I guess, that financial empowerment, if you will, that digital offers?
100%, and no import duties, and things really being made when they are needed, and being able to foster a brand and a consumer base without a ton of upfront investment. And for me, that's really exciting, to only need digital tools to begin to get your ideas out there and to begin to stimulate demand is super exciting. And then I think layering onto that, and we've seen it in the larger, non-fungible token space, and the boom is essentially technologies like blockchain very simply can facilitate you to have royalties programmed into items of clothing. So in the traditional space, first of all, especially with large brands, as we know, the people who are getting the money are the CEOs of the company, not those making the clothes. And with digital fashion, what you can do is you can have it programmed in that the creators are being fairly reimbursed. You can have multiple creators be fairly reimbursed. But even more importantly than that, you can have reimbursement for work following resale. So what I mean by that, and I think a very good example is obviously the vintage market. If you get very lucky, you could buy a dress for, let's say, £100, and it could be a limited edition item, and then actually it could be resold for £500. Or, if the designer takes off £1,000, £2,000. As a consumer, you'll be able to financially benefit, but the creator will actually not be able to benefit from their success past the point of original sale. What blockchain and digital fashion empowers is you can have a contract programmed into the garment where every single time that garment is resold, a creator gets, let's say, 15%. And so fashion can become a consistent revenue generating mechanism, and people can benefit from the success of their brand in a very, very long-term way. And I think that's very, very exciting, as well as these lowered barriers to entry for creators to come into the space.
And also it's that transparency element. And as you said, really giving credit to those that, have worked on that garment, not just from the designers, but, manufacturing point of view. So in a way, there's a lot of social justice that is tied in with digital fashion, which actually is a good segue to Negin, who is focused very much on the ethical space. Hopefully you can hear me, Negin. From Dubai. Excellent. So we've addressed some points about sustainability, about digital fashion, and obviously at the core of this is, how do we operate with this, ethically, and also in terms of, legislation plays a huge role with all of these innovations. So my first question is, in your opinion, is the law keeping up with the innovation when it comes to, let's say, producing and consuming garments in the digital era?
Hi, can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Awesome. So I believe, speaking as a lawyer, or even sometimes as a recovering lawyer, if I may say so, because innovation and technology just move so fast, I feel comfortable to say that legislation is always a little tad bit too late. But because we always follow, lawyers are sometimes not innovators, but more sheep. But it's important to be able to also try to, protect the creators and the talent and the human capital, being the designers, but also the coders these days. So I think legislation right now has a big challenge, a challenge also being a big opportunity. I mean, Nina and Danny mentioned two very important avenues, which are, the ethics, sustainability, but also everything that touches the metaverse and the digital kind of space. So on a daily basis, as a fashion lawyer, just to give you a pragmatic example, I focus a lot on ethical issues, that being, modeling rights. Now also with the metaverse, some models are shifting into, the digital space. And what does that mean when it comes to designers collaborating and being inspired by different cultures? So again, that fine line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation is shifted into the digital space, even into the metaverse. So how are we protecting, the different creative geniuses in that matter? But also the other avenue that Danny was emphasizing is really us working a lot as fashion lawyers on blockchain, right? Blockchain law is one of my expertises. So what I do is a lot of NFT contracts right now and a lot of smart contracts. So the contracts that Danny so eloquently explained are really based on smart contracts, and how can we maybe, follow through and track items as well for sustainability purposes, but also for, high luxury goods that are limited edition. Let's say, a bag from a big French fashion house. How do we, integrate RFIDs into it so we can track it, and we're sure that there's no counterfeit kind of procedures that are involved at some, at some level or process of the garment or the item's lifespan.
So you've touched upon various points here, and one that I'd like to you to explain a bit further is that fine line between cultural appropriation and appreciation. How should we navigate this? Because I think in the digital world, we see, countless images every day, every hour, and, there are a lot of reference points that, you don't know exactly where it's coming from, who's getting that credit. Do you have any advice maybe for us, when we do look at certain images, whether that is an NFT, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm afraid I don't have the answer, even as a fashion lawyer practicing. I don't have an answer on what is right and what is wrong. But I think the most important thing to kind of apply is common sense as well, and also doing our own due diligence. You don't need to be a fashion lawyer to be to start and realize what is maybe appropriated, what is appreciated. So I always say to the designers and the creatives I work with, it's about following your bliss, but also not being ignorant at the same time. So really doing your research, seeing what's out there. A lot of times also to showcase what's happening with cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation is that it's a marketing approach as well. A lot of companies or a lot of influencers or personas out there, they use it on purpose. So their teams or their PR brands are telling them to appropriate, let's say, braids, or to appropriate a Navajo kind of, element in the garment that they're wearing for a fashion show, let's say, or when they're sitting, across the catwalks, right? So I think there are a few good guidelines around it. There are a few good books out there, but I would say It's about realizing, maybe just doing a Google search, honestly, and finding out where a garment comes from and what it means. Because we were, for instance, so I also teach this. So I teach this at fashion schools and also at law schools. And for me, it's really interesting because I learn a lot more from my students that I feel like I'm teaching them, just because they have such different approaches to it, right? So for instance, one of my students was writing her thesis around the cultural appropriation by the Kardashians, right? So she just got graded on that. And of course, cultural appropriation, she wrote it with a K, right? So just to kind of align with the brand identity. And we realized that really each of the sisters was really appropriating and even appreciating, because they are also from different ethnic backgrounds. So where is where do you say stop, and where do you say it's okay to, to go on and, maybe wear that garment and really showcase it to the outside world. But I always say common sense, do your Google search, find out about the history. Sometimes it's very interesting what you find about. It could even be about nail art, right? Like some people now are wearing these different types of nail styles, and where do they come from actually, right? You can always learn some nuggets of wisdom around it. So always like doing your research is helpful. And there are a few really good sources out there online as well, and some books. Happy to share them. Hope that answers the question.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I think the brand Hermes, they've been called out many times for taking the patterns. I know one example from a tribe in Nigeria, and they used that pattern, and that tribe didn't actually get that credit. And there's an argument there that blockchain and tech can really bring that level of transparency, and as Danny was saying, bring credit to those creators, to the history of the garment. So there's definitely a link there. But on the note of Hermes, I'm sure many people in the room here might have been following the story that an NFT creator has created the Meta Birkin and is selling this NFT on the metaverse. I believe, 10,000 pounds for one bag, very expensive. But Hermes, they haven't actually been they haven't profited from it, and they've sued those NFT creators. Danny, feel free to add some comments here. But Negin, from your point of view, I mean, who holds the power today? I mean, it's becoming so democratized, it's becoming so fragmented. I mean, do big brands need to be careful, with their own identities and how, their identities are being appropriated?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So lawyers have been telling big brands, especially the one you mentioned, for a few years now, in meetings, that they need to watch out, because with the digital era, it's really bottom up, and it's about, as you said, creating access. Right, this creative floodgates opening, and that brings up a lot of beautiful synergies as well. And I think it is a beautiful, actually, synergy that this creator put out there, because it will be a great precedent for all the lawyers. Right, all the fashion lawyers are really excited and ecstatic about this case, not really caring about who's getting the money, but really about the precedent that. Retroactively, what does that mean for somebody copying maybe the LV or the Chanel code or any of the other kind of logos? So I think it's a very interesting and appealing case on both sides. I think it definitely reframed Hermes's approach, especially them being very established and very Cartesian in their approach when it comes to everything in their matrix as a company. And I think it was also a big alert sign for a lot of the other brands. And, I think the times are changing. There are new challenges and opportunities. And, somebody was faster than them to come up with this creative approach of creating an NFT. And, I just think it's really exciting.
So in this time of disruption, there's almost more questions than answers in a way, which is, again, quite exciting for everybody in this field. And what I'd like to do now is just go through our Slido and ask some of the questions from the audience here. So all three of you, please feel to jump in when you'd like. But one of our first question is, do you think that the shift into digitally oriented fashion model is obscuring the work for building out sustainable practice in real-world ateliers? ateliers. So again, that kind of question of, is digital and sustainable, are they, can they work together?
From my perspective, maybe what I can offer is not an answer to your question in terms of, limiting the ability to produce in an atelier, but as a platform or as a retailer, as a buyer, what has been really interesting for us in engaging with the digital world is a lot of showrooms, for instance. We were speaking to a showroom in China that represents a lot of emerging brands in the region, and we went through a virtual showroom walkthrough. And rather than having to ship, collections from China to the UK and get a feel for them, we had a fantastic insight for 10 brands last week in a Chinese virtual showroom. And so we are starting to rely much more on digital support from the customer side, as we were discussing, but also from a product selection side. In terms of how that can help you with your production and sustainability, maybe Danny and Negin can answer that a little bit better than I can.
So I think just a very quick thing to touch on, and I think this was really accentuated by the pandemic, is that there was this extreme disruption where previously in the ateliers, everybody would have to be together physically. And then all of a sudden they couldn't be anymore. And so I really see it as a way of accentuating actually this ability to work together remotely, which hopefully will empower others to be able to access the fashion industry who couldn't. But also in relation to the made to order model, if you can start forecasting or building product from various places in the world, all of the shipping costs and sampling costs in terms of finance and sustainability are reduced or cut completely. Virtual showrooms is another brilliant example. So Hilfiger, for example, a couple of years ago, committed to digitizing its entire 60,000 large product library. And that was an intense process for the business because it was upskilling all of its designers to operate in the digital first mode. But then it ended up having these incredible sustainability implications, same thing with Adidas. And so in a long-term way, it's actually very beneficial, even though in a short-term way, the upskilling and retooling can seem incredibly intimidating.
And just to kind of follow up on that point with another question here is, quite philosophical in a way, but, there's so much emphasis on metaverse, on virtual worlds, but in our real world, we have a tremendous amount of issues, whether it's, inequality, whether it's exploitation in the fashion industry. We don't want the virtual world, just to be, escapism. Do you think, and maybe Negin, you can add to this as well, is this actually an opportunity to maybe solve some of those problems?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's interesting regarding fashion law and fashion ethics, just tackling that question is that, the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 that we have right now, are a really interesting opportunity as well. Fashion, like at large, has been tackling them. Some companies or fashion brands more so than others, just because they're closer to the ocean, for instance, right? So whatever is underwater, that being one of the SDGs, they're focusing on. So we could use the digital space really as an educational platform as well, right? Showcasing with videos, but also case studies, creating case studies around it and connecting people in a different way where it doesn't matter really what you're wearing because everyone can access whatever they want, maybe in that metaverse, and really showcase or mirror their personality while really speaking about the essence, which is how can we solve these really important issues together while still not letting go of aesthetically pleasing spaces, because neuroaesthetics are real in real life, but also in the metaverse and in the digital space. So I think it's an opportunity. I think sometimes it can feel like a paradox because alone you can't do anything. But yet again, I think that's why being connected, just like we are right now, is so amazing. It's such a beautiful opportunity or portal more so to really speaking about it and taking actions and seeing what we, in this room can do together even.
And obviously technology is influencing fashion in many ways. But Danny, how do you think is fashion influencing tech? I mean, can tech actually learn from our industry? And I mean, we all know some of the big issues in big tech, whether it comes, gender inequality, racial inequality, for example. Do you think this could actually be, some positive knowledge exchange here?
So that's a really, really great question. I have seen a lot of digital designers in the space, those coming from animator backgrounds, and I really think there's no substitute for people from a fashion background. The ability to understand and interact with the medium, the ability to understand the audience, the way that fabric flows, I think is all incredibly important to just the baseline of the medium and the interaction. And I think 100%. The world that I would love to see is one where there is this intersection, and that the language that's used in tech or the processes are things that can complement the fashion industry, not seen as divorced from each other or impenetrable or intimidating. And that's the world that I hope we're going to start entering into.
Absolutely. And Negin, a question for you, also related to the digital assets, digital world, that comes hand in hand with a lot of scams we're seeing, lots of shady business, for lack of a better word. How do you think that, digital fashion exchanges and e-commerce platforms can actually prevent this? How can we actually, reduce the amount of scams in this virtual world?
Yeah, again, great question from the audience. How can we reduce the scams? I think that from the get-go, having more coders, having more creative tech geniuses part of your team is really important. I personally think that lawyers need to learn how to code as well. I mean, they're starting to teach that at different law schools now as well. I think it's just important to understand that tech is such an integral part of any fashion company these days, on some level or across multiple avenues. So I think it's about having a strong foundation and also doing a tech audit, right? So if you have an e-commerce, it's super important seasonally to do a tech audit and to bring in some hackers and see what's happening. Some of the big companies, like Kering, are doing hackathons just for that, and then they're recruiting these, young geniuses just to be part of the team. So I think just focusing on the tech and also seeing tech also as an artisanal kind of craft rather than seeing it as something super separate, and also creating synergies and workshops with the creative teams and the tech teams. We've been hosting a few workshops like that with different fashion conglomerates, and we realized that, just as this question before you asked Danny, it's really about learning from each other, right? And it's about ricocheting energy back and forth and realizing, wow, I can actually implement that as a coder, when I can implement that into my garment, just, based on as a seamstress, for instance, right? Like, how can I incorporate that and make it even more efficient or utilitarian? So I think it's about kind of creating even more synergies within the teams and kind of reframing what it means to have a tech team and not having that kind of stereotype going on where it's just they're sitting, somewhere in the office or from home, but really integrating them and knowing that they have their own fashion sense, which is beautiful, and just having, a more community kind of spirit going when it comes to that.
And I mean, in the digital space, looking at NFTs, it seems to be really a market for those that have quite a bit of money. It's still quite exclusive. Do you think in the near future that will actually open up? Or is this really something only for the mega rich at the moment? And how can we actually, democratize it more and make it more inclusive for those, that aren't, that luxury consumer, for example?
Yeah, so I think, so just speaking from the eye, I've started writing contracts for NFTs specifically about a year and a half ago. And really, there were a few contracts that were very much for high net worth individuals, but there were also a lot of contracts that were focusing more on communal kind of possession of different pieces. And so this kind of sharing economy element is also integral to NFT. So it really depends on what platform you go for. And also sometimes it's about, again, like as a lawyer, I love due diligence. So it's about doing your research and seeing what platform is actually ethical, right? There are a few NFT platforms that work globally. A lot of them are actually based in Canada that really advocate for sustainable approaches when it comes to creating NFTs and also creating access for any person really that wants to get involved in the space. So we see in the media this image that it's really exclusive, which again, there is this little tribe, NFT tribe, that is pushing it a lot when it comes to their PR and media. But also there are pieces that you could have invested in like a year ago and have made around like anywhere between 15 to 35% on it, which is not bad if you're thinking about, investing anywhere from like, let's say 200 to 1,500 pounds, depending on your budget. So, and I think it's going to open up even more. I mean, you're seeing a lot of bespoke designers collaborating with different mediums to kind of create more access to the space of NFTs. And these collaborations are going to be very interesting to kind of follow. And it's also about, just like how you buy art, it's also about seeing what resonates with you on a soul level, right? Even though that's not legal advice whatsoever, but I really think it's really important to see what speaks to you, right? Because sometimes you buy a piece of art and it's not going to gain any monetary value, but the emotional value is there. So don't only look at the monetary kind of profit you can make, even with NFTs. Just enjoy the journey as well. I always tell my clients, be they smaller investors or bigger investors.
I like your perspective, Negin, from a lawyer's point of view. That's excellent. And a question for you, Nina. You mentioned, returns and kind of product popularity data. But what other kinds of data on platforms, like Cult.me, would be important for designers? Like, what kind of data is valuable for a designer or for a brand when they're working with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think if we think about what pieces of information are most helpful for designers and where we get the most questions is customer feedback. Mm-hmm. Brands typically ask, can you please share, why this is being returned, any feedback on fit, any feedback on materials, quality, and so on. We look at it from an emerging designer perspective. This would be different for an established brand, but we bring up brands online for the first time, or we help brands leave Mexico, my home country, for the first time. So for them, having an international data set is really helpful, especially for countries that have limited exposure given seasonality, but also aggregating larger data sets with respect to customer feedback on fit and design and so on. Of course, they're also really interested in how their products are performing relative to other brands. I think that's also very interesting for a new designer when you think about pricing your products, for instance. Okay, everyone wants to say, let's look at Prada. Okay, no, you're starting out, so where should you fall within that price range? Mm-hmm. So it's also peer data that's super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And I mean, on your platform, just going back briefly to, made to measure, is that, also tackling something like, plus size fashion and, different body types and making sure that it's much more inclusive? Because I think, we all know in sustainability, that's one of the criticisms is that, it has been very exclusive for, one type of person, one demographic. Is that quite core to what Cult.me is looking into now?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's not something I mentioned because we're actually working on a big launch in May around this. But, we like Made to Measure because it's obviously more sustainable, but it's also, like you said, much more inclusive. And a lot of brands, and I understand why, because they're optimizing within a limited size range and they're saying, okay, I'm going to have the most number of sales in the most popular sizes, and then the sizes that are on the left or the right of the size scale don't tend to be made. Mm-hmm. So Made to Measure is really opening up that size range. It's a much more inclusive offering that we're really excited to support.
Excellent. Well, look forward to seeing it. And just finally, a question for Danny. Do you think that luxury fashion will fully adapt to digital fashion one day? There seems to be a bit of a divide between what LVMH and what Kering are doing. Do you think it will be fully embraced from a luxury point of view?
So I think it's inevitable, and I think we've seen in the past year almost every single brand go into the space. And if they're not in, they're trying to get in. I know that from a lot of conversations that I've been having. I think what I'm really excited to see is authentic engagement. So the way that engagement is happening now is it's largely seen as a redirection to consumption of physical product. So Balenciaga was in Fortnite, Moncler was in Fortnite, Gucci partnered with Roblox, Hilfiger partnered with Roblox. But instead of really viewing these as diversified revenue streams, they were saying, how do I sell more physical product or engage a new audience? Whereas I think what we'll see in the future is actually these brands saying we need a team to focus on this. This is a valid revenue stream. And that's the transition that's going to happen. And I still think we're engaging with this reckoning between, the stuff that we discussed about NFTs, where it's accessible and it's to do with fair and equal monetization versus the gated hierarchy that we've dealt with traditionally for hundreds of years. And so there's still this reckoning. I think one of the most interesting things that happened was Artifact, which is a digitally native sneaker brand, was acquired by Nike. And that for me was the strongest indication that anybody was really taking the space seriously, because it wasn't, okay, let us partner and redirect towards physical product. It was, we think this is something worth $100 million plus because we think digital is the future. And I think we're going to see a lot of these similar things happen in the next year or so.
Excellent. And just to wrap up our panel discussion here, I'd like to ask each of you what excites you the most regarding the future of fashion. So I'm talking about the next 5 years. What is that one thing that you find incredibly exciting? And Nina, perhaps I'll start with you.
For me, I think the most exciting thing to see is now when you step on the tube, not everyone is wearing the same Zara coat. And there's this desire to be distinctive, to be original, to dress like no one else does, and to be more inventive and unique.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Negin, what about you?
I think I'm really excited about the intersection of well-being at large and fashion, and how that will translate into the digital space and metaverse, and how that will open up a lot of conversations that maybe we're not having in boardrooms or even on retail floors, but would be necessary to have, just because at the end of the day, it's a service industry. Yes, there are products, but also we need to know how our customer is doing, but also how the creatives are doing, and how can we channel our energies, right? So I think what kind of transcends the 3D or the world we're living in right now and the digital space is really our energy, right? Like I feel like we'll be focusing a lot more also on energy being an undervalued currency that maybe we'll be looking into more and kind of deep diving into it, which right now in fashion has been quite skin deep, if I may say so. So how will that inform the decisions bigger but also smaller brands and creators will be taking in the future to create a more aligned world and to create opportunities and great collaborations. So yeah.
And on that note, Negin, I mean, not just the 3D space. I mean, just tonight, I think, is a perfect example of, us being physically together. We're using teams to talk to Dubai, Los Angeles. There's so many more opportunities from a creative standpoint. So I agree that also excites me. And Danny, what about you?
I think what I'm really excited to see is this, this blossoming group of digitally native designers from all over the world, who are really experimenting with actually the innovation that digital can provide, be that entirely new uses of materials, so a dress that's on fire or made of water, but also other interesting uses of technology. So, imagine if there was a dress that was tied to, let's say, the stock market, and when, let's say, the value of LVMH decreased, it got eaten by moths. There are all of these very exciting emotional connections that can be leveraged in new mediums, and to see fashion designers start to capture those and be from these diverse backgrounds and have full creative expression because you're not gated. That's what I'm truly excited to see in the next few years.
Fantastic. And I'd love to see that dress as well, eaten by moths. Well, if there's something that, I would take away, it's that, even though you're each working in different parts of this very vast industry, there's a lot of overlap. And, the way to find these innovations is actually by working together, having that knowledge exchange together, digital sustainability, ethics, that's the way forward. And so on this point, I'd like to give you guys a round of applause. Thank you so much for your contributions. It's been extremely fascinating, and I hope that everyone here has a bit of food for thought with maybe their own projects, their own work, and whether you're working in fashion or outside of it. Before we go next door to have, a well-deserved drink, and some nibbles, of course, I just want to give a big thank you to the tech team, the AV team, USC, also those at LCF who have made tonight possible. And for you guys for showing up, for coming here, and I hope, the next hour or so we can have some good conversations next door. So thank you guys, and I'll see you in a second.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina.